Right, okay then. This lesson is lesson 2 of Unit 2 for the American West paper, GCSE. We're going to be looking at the development of the railroad. Now, we've already looked at some of the consequences of the Civil War, which was between the years 1861 to 1865. And due to the Confederacy states leaving, it allowed for the Union to pass laws. And now one of them was this railroad. So the point of today's lesson is very simple: to look at what the Railroad Act was, to explain why certain people needed it and the impact that it had, and then look at the consequences of the railroad. And in particular, we're going to look at the positive and negative consequences. We're going to look at the impact on lawlessness, and we're also going to look at the impact that it had on the Native Americans and explain why that was so significant. So, we're going to go through some information. Now, while we go through this, it's quite important that you understand, firstly, what challenges were faced before 1862. The plan for the railroad. Who were the companies that actually overcame this really monumental task? How did the government help these groups? And then positives of the railroad for settlement. Remember, settlement is a key word. Settlement means people staying in a certain area. So settlement is really important that you understand that word so that we develop this further in the course. So, railroad information. I'm going to go through this and explain as I go along. I might add a few text boxes in just to explain some things further. So the Railroad Act provided the incentive for transcontinental railroad building, having a railroad that basically spanned the entire country. America needed this because this would have really boosted economy, which would have been really important, especially as more people began to migrate. The railroad made migration to the West much easier and quicker. Now, if we just take that one step further and remember that before the railroad, the journey was very dangerous, mainly the Oregon Trail. I mean, all I have to write is this word here for you to remember how dangerous it was. The Donner Party really did show how difficult this journey was in a nutshell. So, move that out of the way. The railroad also promoted development of towns. Wherever a railroad area was built, a station was built, that a town usually followed. Okay, that's quite important that you understand that. They boosted the sale of land because the railroads were given land that they could sell to people, which we'll go into in a bit more detail later. And they allowed industrial centres in the north to connect to the west, allowing for trade and help for everyone. There were two problems with building a railroad to connect the east and the west of the USA, so problems before 1862. First one was the difficulty and the cost of building a railroad that was going to span about 2,000 kilometres. On flat land, this would have been okay. But remember, the landscape of America was very mountainous. Many private companies just wouldn't risk it because it could potentially bankrupt them. So the railroad was a gigantic task for anyone who was going to take it. Private companies steered clear because they knew that it could potentially cause massive problems. The other problem before 1862 was that the North and South disagreed. Surprise, surprise. Okay, remember, this was a time where they were fighting one another in the Civil War. The North wanted to connect California with its big industrial cities like Chicago. And the South wanted a southern route as they thought the northern route would damage them overall. Okay? Lastly, it must be understood that there already was a railroad in the north and the east that connected the Missouri River. However, the government wanted this railroad to stretch across America. The government wanted to select a route that went from California, Sacramento, to Nebraska, Omaha. That's where they wanted to connect together. This would have allowed more economic prosperity for the country. Straight away, looking at the positives of this, we need to consider the fact that traveling would be easier, less dangerous. We need to also understand the fact that this would have allowed economic development of America. The government would have benefited hugely. That's what we need to understand with this. Okay? Now, further information. I'll just get rid of these annotations so that we can make it clearer. So, further information. So that's the first That first aspect we looked at, the problems. Now going further, the Railroad Act split the job of building the railroad between two companies. So two companies stepped up and said, we want to build this railroad. You had the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. The Union Pacific started in Omaha and built the tract westwards, and the Central Pacific started in Sacramento and built it eastwards. In order to make the job possible and profitable, the Railroad Act, basically what the government promised these companies was that, number one, they'd remove Indian rights across the land which the railroad was on. Now, straight away, we need to consider this as a problem. Removing Indians' rights equals a problem. It's going to lead to conflict, and it is, between the years 1862 and 1866, there were many significant battles. That's probably down to the fact that the government went against their word. Make sure I spell government right. Went against their word when they created the border with the frontier, the Trade and Intercourse Act of 1834. So the government said, don't worry, we'll remove the Indians' rights across the land which the railroad was on. What's that going to move the Indians into further? Potentially reservations. Another thing the government promised is that they would loan the company $16,000 for every mile of flat track and $48,000 for mountainous land. So any area that was by the mountains, the companies could make quite a significant amount of money. The government also promised to give the companies land to sell to people across the railroad route. So for the railroad companies, very simple, if they did this well, if they did their job well, the profit for them was high. Okay? The benefit for the government in the long term was going to be clear. If the companies did this well, then they were going to make a significant amount of profit as well because of the land they were going to sell. Next, in all, so this whole process of the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, the government gave the companies 45 million acres of land and loaned them over $61 million. Now, this was a huge amount. Okay, it's unimaginable how much money that the government gave to these companies to build this railroad. But because of this, even though the government gave them a lot of help, both companies nearly went bankrupt. As I mentioned, a lot of companies steered clear from this sort of job because it was such a risk. The main reason why these companies nearly went bankrupt was because building the railroad was such a big task, and the Union Pacific in particular were caught charging the government more than it spent to try and make money for its investors. I mean, overall, all in all, the railroad was completed in 1869, this project, but that wasn't the end for railroad building. There were still aspects of the railroad that were being built throughout the country for many, many years. Now, we've gone through those bits there. The railroad company also used marketing to encourage settlers to buy land off them. So as I mentioned, the railroad companies were given land, millions of acres of land to be able to sell. They put on special trips and organised loans to help people to buy the land. And each railroad company had a Bureau of Immigration to get people from outside the country into America and settle on the plains, an area that was really difficult to settle on. One railroad agent persuaded 10,000 Scandinavians to move to Nebraska, while another agent organised 60,000 Germans to come into Kansas. And by 1880, the railroad companies had settled around 200 million acres of land in the West. As they built more railroad, they were given more land, hence why that number's a lot bigger than what I mentioned earlier. This meant that the railroad was significantly more effective than the Homestead Act. It meant more opportunity, more chance for people to come into the country, and where they were living had more aspects of success, allowed people to potentially achieve manifest destiny. Now, again, you're not going to do this, but I just wanted to put this slide in because it was based on something you would have done in lesson. Consequences of the railroad. Now, you might get one or two questions in the exam for this. You might get the explain to consequences question. So just as a going over here, just go through how you answer these two questions real quickly. So remember, with the explain to consequence question, one thing you've really got to understand is that it can be positive or negative, long-term or short-term. Did it change anything? Now, what the exam board is looking for in this question is specific examples. No, if I could spell, that'd be great. No vague responses. Okay, really important. The other question, explain the importance of the railroad to the lives of the Indians. 3 P or 2 P or P, sorry, paragraphs. Linking X to Y is vital. Don't just describe, explain. That's exactly what you need, okay? So we'll go through some of these consequences just to look at it in a bit more detail, okay? And then we can take it one step further. So here's a list of statements that you need to have an understanding of, and we'll annotate these as we go. Made travelling west much cheaper and less dangerous. People no longer had to face the daunting prospect of the Oregon Trail. Straight away, you're going to be looking at that one and thinking that is positive, mainly for settlers, people who wanted to travel. Okay, now, while we're doing this, we will consider who it's positive for. Now, obviously, every aspect here you could say is negative for the Native Americans, but we need to just be more aware, and we'll do that a bit later. Immigration from Europe was encouraged. Well, that's positive, and the group that's really going to benefit from that is the government, due to the economic boost that they would get from having people come into their country. It could be negative for lawlessness because of the racist aspect of America, because many individuals are very set in their ways, and it did lead to a lot of problems in the long run. Homesteaders found it easier to farm on the plains, as it could transport their crops. It could ensure that they achieve manifest destiny a lot easier. Well, that's positive for the settlers straight away. It's going to improve farming, and in turn, that might also help the government. Towns grew rapidly along railroad routes. Every rail terminal became a town. Well, that's positive in terms of the economy, but negative because of lawlessness, which we'll look at later on. Okay, so it does have positive and negative connotations. Connected Western territories with the East and integrated them into the USA, allowed manifest destiny to be on the way. Well, that's positive for a range of groups. You've got positive for the government, you've got positive for settlers, you've got positive definitely for farming techniques. Allowed the USA to begin trade with Asia. That's another positive, mainly in this case for the government. Plains Indians tribes were moved away from railroad routes. Well, that's negative. Why? Because it's going to cause more of these things for the Native Americans, reservations, which is going to be highly problematic. Tying buffalo numbers, the tracts and the land grants reduced the grassland, and trains brought hunters to the plains. Again, negative because of the respect, the reverence that the Native Americans had for the buffalo. This is going to cause problems, and it could in turn cause conflict. Really problematic that it could bring this. Plains Indians' attacks on railroad surveyors and constructions led to conflict with the US Army. Well, that's negative. It's going to change opinions and change attitudes on the Native Americans, which in turn could change policy. Railroads led the way for invasion of the Plains Indians land by white Americans. Okay? Well, depends which way you look at it, but here it's definitely negative because of the conflict that it's going to bring. Each railroad had a Bureau of Immigration to persuade people from foreign countries to move onto the plains, 10,000 to Nebraska and 60,000 Germans to Kansas. I mean, this again is another positive aspect for the government. But you could argue all of these statements, minus the ones we've already talked about, you could say that a lot of them were negative, for the Native Americans. More influential than the Homestead Act in helping people settle on land, because the railroad companies had more land to sell. The prospect of settling near the railroad was more appealing for individuals because they could make more money. Positive, definitely. Okay? Just think about it. You see some areas in this country at the moment where, the biggest areas have the most significant railroad. Okay? You go to London and you see the amount of trains that leave London, it's because they have a massive railroad. What happens in London? Well, there's more population, there's more economic opportunity. There's a real benefit there by living near a railroad. Okay, house prices, even though this isn't overly relevant to this course, house prices, if you live near a railroad, then the house price is higher. So this shows you the importance of a railroad overall. So you've got plenty here to discuss positives and negatives. Moving on. Another consequence of the railroad was the lawlessness that it brought. So because of the railroad, new towns were created, and they were lawless at the start. Remember, lawless means there was a lot of crime, hence the name Hell on Wheels. The most lawless towns were cow towns, areas which cows were brought to move on. So cows were brought to certain towns, put on the railroad, and sent somewhere else. The big thing here is the type of people that brought. The cowboys. Once cowboys reached their destination, the cow towns, they'd be paid. And they'd have a payday celebration. They'd waiting for their next drive. So they could be in a town for a significant amount of time. This led to gunfights, gambling, drinking, and arguments over prostitutes. Lawlessness that was very similar to what we've looked at previously in the mining towns. There's a bit of continuity there, just this was on a much larger scale. Cowboys, very dangerous at times. Abilene. Abilene was a cow town in Kansas. Now, if you're struggling with any of these concepts, obviously just have a look at your map. It's quite easy to spot some of these key areas. Now, there was an attempt to stop lawlessness. A jail was built in Abilene, but it was torn down very quickly. Guns were also banned. A sign that told people about it had loads of holes shot through it. Kind of says it all about lawlessness. Abilene also hired a man called Thomas Smith in 1870 to help with lawlessness. He was a real tough individual. He was a very skillful boxer, and there's more than one occasion where he stopped cowboys doing what they were doing by using his boxing skills. He also banned guns, which was a real issue with cowboys. But the thing is here, he died in 1870 after being shot and then killed with an axe. The only way that Abilene did have to deal with their problems was by banning cow drives into their areas. This shows well, all of this happened because of the creation of this railroad. It allowed more free movement and problems for people who couldn't deal with this influx, such a high boost in population. The last thing for this lesson is how did the Indians react? What impact did this have on this group of individuals? Now, you've got 5 consequences here. It's up to you to decide which effect would have the greatest impact on them and why, but we're just going to explain a few of them. Buffalo hunting became a sport, with special excursion trains taking the hunters onto the plains. Straight away, this is going to cause many problems. One, the Native Americans used the buffalo to survive. If numbers go down, the Native Americans are going to need to rely on the government to survive. Second thing you could also say is it's going to cause conflict due to the insensitive nature in which the buffalo were being killed. Remember, the one thing the Native Americans wanted to do was bury the heart. If that wasn't done, then the soul would be significantly disrupted, and that would be really problematic overall. The other impact it had was the railroad brought goods to homesteaders and ranchers, which led to people being able to expand their farms, their settlements, less land for the Native Americans, and as mentioned previously, it meant that they were going to potentially be moved further into reservations, which again would cause massive problems in the long run. Prevented movement and the hunting for the Indians. Indians' attitudes turned hostile to new settlers, which is going to cause war. In a few lessons' time, we're going to discuss this. The fencing off land prevented movement of Native Americans. Why is that a problem? Very simple. They are nomadic. That's going to stop them from free movement, and that's a big part of their life. Okay? Just so you have an understanding that you could use that in the explain two consequences question. So that's your lesson on the railroad. There's plenty there, and if we go back to the first slide, just go back. We know what it is, we explain the need for it, and we can assess the consequences. This is a big part of the course, and it's something that people really do focus on because it had so many different consequences on so many different people.